This is the grave of the man who invented the fitness industry. His wife refused to mark it, and for 77 years, nobody did. So how does the most famous body in the world end up forgotten in an unmarked grave? He was born Friedrich Wilhelm Müller, the son of a greengrocer, in a cold Baltic city at the edge of the German Empire. His family wanted him to become a minister. He had other plans. At 10 years old, his father took him to Italy, and in the galleries of Rome and Florence, something happened. He stood in front of ancient Greek and Roman sculptures, and he didn't just admire them. He made a decision. He was going to look like that. Years later, when he was the most famous body on Earth, people would ask how he built that physique. The answer was simple and slightly insane. He went back to those museums with a measuring tape and built himself using the statues as the blueprint. In 1885, aged 18, he fled Prussia to avoid military conscription, joined a traveling circus. He reinvented himself from the ground up. New name, new identity. Friedrich Müller was gone. Eugen Sandow was born. In Brussels, he walked into the gym of a strongman named Professor Attila. Attila saw something in him and took him on. 4 years later, he told Sandow to go to London and enter a competition. What happened next made him famous overnight. Sandow walked into the show of the reigning European strongman, a man called Samson. In front of Samson's own crowd, he issued a challenge. Samson had a prop, a dumbbell, awkwardly shaped, deliberately off balance, weighing around 150 pounds. It was designed to humiliate challengers, to make them look weak in front of the crowd. Nobody had ever lifted it cleanly. Sandow lifted it overhead, twice, in dead silence. Samson was finished, and sitting in that crowd was a young promoter named Florenz Ziegfeld. He signed Sandow on the spot. By 1893, Sandow was performing at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. 27 million visitors, the most famous event on Earth. A Harvard professor examined him and called him the finest physical specimen of manhood he had ever seen. By the time Sandow left America, he'd earned over $250,000. His name was a household word. And then he did something nobody had done before. He appeared in a motion picture. Just him, flexing. It became one of the first commercial films in history, the most famous body in the world, now immortalized on film. At this point, Sandow was the most famous body on Earth. But fame wasn't the goal. What he actually wanted was to change how every ordinary person thought about their body. And to do that, he built something nobody had ever built before. London, 1897. Sandow opened the Institute of Physical Culture on St. James's Street. It was the world's first commercial public gym. Not a private club for gentlemen, not a military training facility, but a place any ordinary person could walk into and be coached to change their body. The equipment that existed wasn't built for what he had in mind, so he designed his own. Spring chest expanders, grip developers, resistance apparatus engineered for progressive, systematic training. He understood, before the language existed to describe it, that the body adapts to load, and that load needs to increase over time. He was writing about submaximal training and controlled progression decades before sports science formalized either idea. He wasn't just a gym owner, he was building a system. He launched Sandow's Magazine of Physical Culture in 1898, the world's first bodybuilding magazine. It reached readers across Britain and the Empire. He wrote 4 books. He ran a mail-order coaching program, postal correspondence with clients he would never meet, prescribing training and diet based on measurements they sent him by letter. He employed clerks to reply to every one of them personally, by name. He sold supplements. He endorsed equipment. He licensed his name and his image. He understood, completely intuitively, that a body could be a brand, and that the brand could outlast the body. He had no internet, no algorithm, no camera phone. He had a body, a printing press, and an obsession. In 1901, he organized what would become a landmark event in sporting history, the Great Competition, held at the Royal Albert Hall. 15,000 people filled the auditorium. 60 competitors from across Britain stood on stage and were judged on the development, symmetry, and condition of their physiques. The panel of judges included Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, then at the height of his fame. Sandow himself presented the trophies. Small bronze statues of his own body. That detail matters. Even then, he understood that what he was building was bigger than him personally. He was creating a standard, a template, something that would continue after he was gone. In 1904, he published Sandow's System of Physical Training. The book used and helped establish the term bodybuilding in print, framing the deliberate development of the body as a discipline in its own right, separate from athletic performance, separate from strength sport. He told his readers to train in front of mirrors, to study themselves, to track their own development visually over time. He was describing the practice of the modern gym, the mirror check, the progress photo, the measurement log, 100 years before any of it had a name. And it wasn't just men. Sandow published specific training guidance for women, arguing publicly that physical development was as important for women as for men. A genuinely radical position in Edwardian Britain, where female exercise was widely considered medically risky or socially inappropriate. He built a clientele that included women across class lines. By 1911, King George V appointed him Professor of Scientific and Physical Culture to the Crown. The boy from Königsberg had a royal warrant. At his peak, Eugen Sandow had built something that had never existed before. An industry, a philosophy, a method. The idea, the radical, countercultural, now completely obvious idea, that the body is not fixed, that it is material, that any person, regardless of how they were born, could pick up a weight and become something different. Everything in every gym you have ever walked into starts here. Then the war came. On the 4th of August, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. And Eugen Sandow, born Friedrich Müller in Königsberg, Prussia, found himself on the wrong side of history. He had lived in Britain for 25 years. He had a British wife, British children, a royal warrant from the British Crown. None of it was enough. The anti-German sentiment that swept through Britain in 1914 was total. Businesses with German names were boycotted. German-born residents were interned. Streets were renamed. Dachshunds were kicked in the street. Sandow was not interned. His profile and his royal connections protected him from that. But his empire fractured almost immediately. The institute closed. The magazine folded. The mail order business collapsed. The brand he had spent 30 years building was suddenly catastrophically a liability. He tried to contribute to the war effort, offering his expertise to help train and condition British soldiers. There is evidence he worked with military units in some capacity during the war years. But it wasn't the same. The country that had made him famous had, in the space of a few weeks, made him an outsider. And at home, things were harder still. His marriage to Blanche Brooks, a woman who had stood beside him through the years of building, had grown distant. The details of what happened between them are mostly private, as they should be. What is documented is the distance. Sandow was absent in the way that driven men often are, physically present, but already somewhere else. The obsession that had built an empire had also hollowed out everything around it. By the early 1920s, Sandow was attempting to rebuild. He opened a new health institute. He resumed writing. He was 55, 56 years old, still physically formidable by any ordinary measure, but not what he had been. The body that had launched an industry was aging, and for a man who had made the body his entire identity, that was its own kind of crisis. In 1925, Eugen Sandow died at his home in Kensington. He was 58. Newspapers reported a brain hemorrhage. The story that circulated, never fully verified, was that years earlier he had lifted his car out of a ditch single-handed, and the strain had never left him. His death certificate said aortic aneurysm. The exact truth died with him. His wife Blanche arranged the burial at Putney Vale Cemetery. No headstone, no inscription, no public funeral. The most documented body in Victorian and Edwardian Britain was put in the ground without a name. She never gave a public explanation. She outlived him by many years and never spoke about it. Whatever she felt, the grief, the distance, the complicated arithmetic of a life spent with a man who belonged, in some essential way, more to the public than to her, she kept it entirely to herself. It was only in 2002 that a proper headstone was finally placed on the grave. By the British health and fitness industry, 77 years after he died, the Mr. Olympia trophy, the most prestigious prize in professional bodybuilding, awarded every year since 1965 to the greatest physique on earth. It is a golden statue of Eugen Sandow's body. The man is forgotten. The body is immortalized. He was the first person to argue, seriously, publicly, with evidence, that the body is something you build, not something you're born with. That ordinary people, not just athletes or performers or the naturally gifted, could transform themselves through training, through discipline, through system. He built the gym, he built the magazine, he built the competition, built the mirror check, the mail order coaching program, the idea that physical development was a legitimate pursuit for any person who chose it. All of it. From nothing. with no template to follow because he was making the template. And he did it as a man who had invented himself from scratch. A greengrocer's son who looked at a 2,000-year-old statue in an Italian museum and decided with complete seriousness that he was going to look like that. He very nearly did. And when his time came, the man who had been photographed more than almost any other person of his era, whose measurements were published in medical journals, whose image was on magazine covers across the English-speaking world, was buried without a name.